All right, so now we kind of want to create custom exceptions. Why would we want to do custom exceptions? Well, maybe the exceptions that's already built doesn't apply to our current problem. And to be honest, you could have always, rather than creating custom, you could have always thrown runtime exception if you want it unchecked, or exception when you want it to be checked. But the problem with that is the supplied name that we see is going to be hard for us to make sense out of it as programmers. Why are we saying that? Well, let's go back to here for a second. Here, if you notice the names, they specifically explain what it is. They're kind of straightforward. The name says it all. This is clean code. But to be honest, there's really no big difference between these three. Maybe once in a blue moon, they would do a little change, but it's really the same thing. And if we look inside our runtime exception, how I got there just to show you, I hold down Control, click on any of these ones, let's say illegal state exception, and then we'll go up one level. Okay, so runtime exception, holding down Control, click on it. Now, this is an object on its own, but what's interesting is all the objects that are derived from this runtime exception. And we could see that by this little O over here. So if we click on that, you could see that there is a lot of exceptions that exist. Abort exception, accept pending exception, access control, blah, blah, blah. There is hundreds and whatever. And if we go up one more level so that we get to the checked exceptions and we click on this, you'll see again another list full of them. So if you cannot find the exception you need to throw for when an issue happens, we're going to, I forgot to show you how to throw an exception, but we'll come back to that. We're going to create ourselves a custom exception, right? So the moment that we need something that makes more sense to our project, we're going to throw a custom exception. So to create a custom exception is we're going to create a new class and we're going to name it whatever we want. For now, we're going to just name it custom exception. Always with the word exception in the class name. As you've seen everything else, we're going to keep going with the standard that's already there. So we haven't learned inheritance yet, but we need to do this keyword extends, and we'll talk about it in the next few videos. We need to do this keyword extends right after our class name, and we're going to specify which one we want to derive from. So do we want the checked exception or do we want the unchecked exception? So let's try it first with runtime exception. Runtime exception is the unchecked one. All right, let me just write that down here. Maybe it'll be a bit easier. So runtime exception equals unchecked. Again, if you don't remember, unchecked will allow us to run it without handling it. Run it without saying, without doing the try catch block. Okay. And we'll try both of them. Now, when you do this, you're pretty much done. The only thing you need to do is kind of overwrite some methods to help you out. And the method you need to overwrite, you could just click Control O in here if you have this IDE, is the one that takes a message. And this is important for us. You could do one without a message because honestly, the name normally tells you everything. But if you want to add a few more message, like we've done before, you want to override this one. And we'll talk about overriding, but for now, this would be good enough. So there's a couple things that are going on here, and you could see this super. We're not going to talk about it, but don't touch it. We'll talk about it when we come to inheritance. Now, we're pretty much done with our class. What is going on here is we created our custom exception that's going to be thrown at any time in our code. So let's go back to our finally over here, and we're going to throw an exception. So this is when an error happens, we do something called a throw, which is different from our method signature, which had throws. Means the throws with an S means it has the possibility of throwing an error. It might or it might not, but you need to handle it, whoever's on the higher level. But when you do the throw without the S, it's saying right now at this line, at this statement, throw this exception, which we said, sorry, we got to say it's a new object, custom exception. And over here, we're going to put our message, something happened. We don't know what. And I can't spell. All right. So this one we could take off. Now, if I run this, and again, because this is a unchecked, you'll notice that the compiler will allow me to run it. And we could see that our error is coming up on our screen because it was unchecked and it was thrown here, right? As you could see here. Our message is being shown, something happened, and that's pretty much it. And you could also see our stack trace right down below, which is not much. What if we put this one, oops, cut this line, if it's gonna let me, there we go. I'm gonna cut that line and we're gonna throw it inside the finally. Oops. I'm being a bit stupid here. There we go. Right. So this is a bit weird, but stick with me. So in this case, let's run it again. The only thing I wanted to show you was the stack trace that's going to happen. And again, you could see that all of it is blue because that's our code. All three of them are blue, even the custom exception. And you could see it got thrown at line 16, which is here, which got called by this method, main, at line 6, which is an interesting way to figure out where the issues are. So this is a unchecked. If we come here and we change runtime exception to exception, you could see there our IDEs, like there's a problem related to this. We click on it. It says, well, if you're going to throw it here, someone needs to handle it. And we could forward that handling to the caller. Let's say here, custom exception. And now over here, we need to handle this issue. We could say a try. Oops, I clicked on the wrong button. I have big fingers. Catch. And we have custom exception, exception. What did I do wrong? There we go. It's all good. Control Alt L to clean up our code a little bit. And over here, we could write whatever message we want. We could also write exception.get the message. All right, let's run this. And now this time when we throw that exception, we're going to get something happen without all the red. And if you want it red, just put that system.ar. That's not the important part. But anyway. Cool. You'll notice that when I put the ER, they came after this out. This is something to do with the specific streams that we're using. We're not going to talk about it. It's not so important. Actually, you know what? We're going to stick to out so the video doesn't become too long. Okay. So something happened, blah, blah, blah. We move on. So this is pretty much all you need to do for your custom exceptions. Now, why would you want to have these custom exceptions? Well, let's say over here, we want to have specific exceptions for our person. So if something happened, we want to manage that. Let's say as an example, this person over here, when they created, they didn't give me a name. So we could do something. If, if name equals no, right? They didn't give me a name. We want to throw a new custom exception. Now, if we look at these names, they don't match the name that we're looking for. We have something like a null pointer exception, but that is what we want, but we want to make it a bit more specific so that the programmer that's using our class can understand what the issue is or possible issues that could happen during runtime. So let's say over here, we say, I want a new class, and we're going to call it name not, oh, look at here. There's one other one, name not found exception. We could do a Control Q to see what it is. There's no more information on that, but let's say name not supplied exception. And we're going to say, please provide a name for person before usage. And you're going to see here, it's not created yet. We could use the IntelliSense to create it for us if we want to create class, or we could just create it like we did, whichever one works for you. I'm going to put it in basics. And we're not going to change anything else. The only thing we need to do is this needs to be supplied to the higher level. So Control O, and we're going to select, no, that's not what we want. No, okay, don't use the ID to create it. It's extending throwable. We do not want that. What we want is to make sure we either use exception or runtime exception based on checked or unchecked. In this case, I want it to be managed, or actually unmanaged, because if they don't have the name, it's not so important, but I want them to, I don't want them to handle it, but I want them to know about it. So we're going to say runtime exception. And over here, we're going to do Control O and do the one with the message. And that's it. So now if we go back to person, this error is good. We go where it's being supplied or used. Let's say one of these, they're all in the same place. Actually, are they? Let's see. This one's in person Java. Okay, yeah, they're all in the same place. So let's say in this example, I forgot to supply a name. Do I have another one? I have two constructors. I have one without a name and one with a name. But this one, they made a mistake. They supplied a name, but they put the value null, right? So they supplied an object, but a fake object. The object doesn't exist. In this case, this will throw me an exception. You're not allowed to do that. Either put in the name or don't put in the name. And you could see here, when the exception is thrown, now I get a better sense of what the problem is just by the name. Name not supplied exception. Actually, there is one that should be allowed without name. But anyway, a null name not supplied. Make it something that makes sense. Okay, we're just doing an example. And to further give you an idea, we have the little message here. Please provide a name for a person before usage. Okay, this is why we create these custom exceptions. It makes it easier for programmers to understand what's going on and so forth, so on. Now, one thing I want you to remember is that these custom exceptions are there for you to manage and customize. So if we wanted to, we could specify other variables, other field variables, other methods that's useful for whoever's using it. So in this case, it's not the best example for name. Let's see what else we could do in person. Let's just check one quickly. Get name, jumps, how far. Okay, let's say this height number. Okay, he's jumping and he's allowed to go this high. I'm gonna first put the public stuff that we were missing. Actually, this one as well. It was a older video example. Anyway, so let's say in the jump, if high, why is there high? There we go. If height is less, or sorry, if it's less than or equal to 0, there we go, that's good enough. We want to throw a new exception. And again, invalid height. Okay? Again, don't forget the word exception at the end. Now this time, I could enter the message. Well, actually, let's go first and create it, okay? So we're gonna say, I'm gonna copy that. Basics, right click, new Java class, invalid exceptions. Now we gotta first determine, do I want it to be checked or unchecked? In this case, again, if it's checked for doing a try catch on jumps, is not a good thing. So we're gonna just do it again, a unchecked runtime exception. We're gonna again import the initial one. And this time we're gonna modify it a bit. So not only do I want a message, I want the current height. So that was a float. I'm gonna say float and how high. right? So I can't spell. There we go. And over here, we could make a public final float, and we're going to call it high. So that we could say this high equals this high. Why am I doing that? Is so that we could see what value the user entered and we could show them, right? So let's come back here. So here we need a message. Height, or I don't know, the height, even though we wrote jumps this high, height cannot be 0 or less. It has to be a minimum, right? And here we could supply the value supplied. Cool. Again, we could create other methods too, such as, let's say, a public getter. We don't really need it because this is public and it's final, so it can't be changed. I don't know, we could create any methods we want. It's a class, it's a normal class. Just remember that it's customizable to the extreme. Don't put limits to what you can do with it, is what I'm trying to say. So let's utilize this jump thing. So let's go back to person, or start actually. So here we're going to remove the null so we don't get that exception. Now, when person, let's say 1, he jumps, and we put 20, it's perfectly fine. 23 is a valid value. When person 2 jumps, and we put, let's say, 0, this is going to cause us an issue, a runtime issue. This could have been a user value, right? So you could have a scanner, we get his input, he puts 23, it's good. He puts 0 for this one, it's bad. Let's run it again. And there was no need to put a checked exception. This is fine. Checked is really when we can't move forward and everything crashed. This is one of them, but you know, we'll figure this out as we go forward. I'm not explaining it really well. So now let's check what's going on. We got our exception, invalid height exception, and we got a little message. Okay, fine. Now let's capture this inside of a try and catch block. Actually, we could move this up here. And this time, let's put this one under. We're gonna catch it, and we got an invalid height exception. But notice what we could do this time. The message that we put, we could customize it for the user. So our job, the one who's running the class, the one who's calling this method, it's his job or way of thinking of how to deal with this. So over here, invalid height selected, and we could put the value of it, exception, high. Please, let's say, select a new value, higher than 0. And it seems I forgot to close something. There we go. Okay. By doing this, we're allowing the programmer who's utilizing our class called person. So whoever is creating this start thing is utilizing a class that doesn't belong to him. We would give him enough details and enough values that they could make a more customizable or more straightforward error message. So let's run it again. And again, this could have been in a loop for grabbing the values of the user. So look at here, we got invalid height selected, 0, 0. Please select a new value higher than 0. And we get new values. What if we had minus 23? Again, you could see we showcase that value. So these custom exceptions are just normal classes that we could customize to our benefit to make sure that the error messages or the errors are clean enough and clear enough that people could understand what's going on. And this is really important. Remember, we're always working with 100 people. We cannot be doing everything in our own way, especially since you come back to it a week later or a month later or a year later and you won't remember anything. So I'll see you guys in the next video.